It's good to see so many familiar and new faces. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Eileen Alduenda, and I have the pleasure of being the Executive Director for the Council for Watershed Health. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the 2023 State of the LA River Watershed Symposium, and we begin today with a land acknowledgement. The Council for Watershed Health recognizes and acknowledges the First Peoples of this ancestral and unceded territory that is now occupied by the Autry Museum of the American West. We acknowledge the Gabrielino-Shoshone tribe and their neighbors, the Fernandeño Tataviam Band of Mission Indians in the San Fernando Valley, whose territories are both occupied by the Autry Museum. We honor their elders, past and present, and their descendants. We recognize a painful history of erasure on the unceded territory we now occupy. We also recognize that the Council for Watershed Health has not historically included tribes in our own work. We commit to being better allies and partners. We recognize that Native peoples have stewarded this land since the time immemorial, and that the First Peoples are still here. We recognize that we cannot achieve the sustainability and health of our watersheds without tribal partnership and meaningful tribal engagement. We are committed to uplifting tribes in our work and ensuring meaningful engagement of tribes in all spheres of watershed management. I'd like you to take a moment and reflect on how you will uplift the culture, heritage, and legacy of the First Peoples of Los Angeles County and meaningfully engage and compensate tribal governments in your ongoing and future work. At lunch, we'll share with one another what we've been reflecting on this morning and throughout the day. Today promises to be an informative and engaging day. We have many voices to hear and listen to learn and share lessons with. It's not possible to do this type of day, and it's probably our most ambitious symposium to date, without our partnership with LA Sand and Environment and for our support from our sponsors. And a special shout out to Jacobs for their consistent and generous support. I'm excited to hear a little bit more about what each of you is doing, and so please definitely kind of reach out to me throughout the day. I'm going to make sure that we connect you with our staff and our partners and resources for all of the work that you're doing. And I hope that you'll be able to join us for at least all of the main program, and if you are able, stick around for the poster session and reception, or come back. I know a few of you have to leave and come back. It promises to be a little bit more informal and just as engaging as the day will be. So with that, it's now my pleasure to introduce Steve Arakawa, the President of the Council for Watershed Health.
Thank you all. Welcome this morning. I really appreciate you coming today and having an interest in what we're going to do today. I think you'll find it really invigorating. And I think I wanted to just have some opening remarks. The Council for Watershed Health, which was formed in 1996, really with its founder, Dorothy Green, has always been about getting diverse interests and diverse opinions together. And that continues to be what we do. That's our objective. I think you'll see in our discussions today, and I'm sure you all come in with these views that we aren't necessarily of the same opinion on some of these things, but that's okay, because the purpose of the council is to bring everybody together and talk about our views and to see where we can move in a direction that helps everybody. And that really is our objective. And as Eileen said just a few minutes ago, our objective really is partnerships, and it's a work in progress. We continue to build those partnerships with not only the agencies that are involved in governmental work, but specifically with the community-based organizations, the non-governmental organizations, and the tribes and others. And we have really spent a lot of time in the last year focusing on how we can implement our business practices both externally and internally in a way that actually is doing something about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. not necessarily just a policy statement, but what does that mean to our daily activities, both inside the organization and outside? So in that regard, I think over the coming years, we're going to continue building those partnerships, and I think that can help us all come together to implement projects that come together because of integrated decision-making, participatory decision-making, and hopefully projects get done in a way that can be supported by the communities and the peoples that live within those communities. I'd like to now introduce our next speaker, Barbara Romero, who was appointed by Mayor Garcetti in the previous administration to be the general manager of the Los Angeles Sanitation and Environment organization, and she's been in that since 2001. Barbara has been involved in city activities and environmental and resource management for so many years, and we're so fortunate to have her here today, but also just her involvement over the years. The partnership that we have with LA Sanitation and Environment is critical to us because, and I mean collectively us, because we, under that partnership, do the monitoring of the LA River, and we understand how is that affecting the environment, how is that affecting public health, how does that lead to projects that can improve not only the management of the system, but the communities that surround the river. And an example of that is in the San Fernando Valley, the Elmer Avenue neighborhood retrofit demonstration project, where collectively a number of organizations and agencies came together to fund the implementation of a stormwater runoff project to demonstrate that you can do stormwater runoff in a way that captures water but provides that water safely for water quality purposes. We also work together with LA Sanitation and Environment on green infrastructure, and that is projects that have multiple benefits, that have a cross-cut of resource management goals and objectives. And so that partnership with LA LA City is so critical to the council's work and to all of our work together. So with that, I'd like to introduce Barbara Romero, who is going to give some opening remarks, and then we'll go from there.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here, not in the capacity of being one of the hosts and the sponsors of today's symposium. It's been, when you say that, it's been over 20 years. I was at MRCA in 2003, so full circle. And I see a lot of friendly faces. I see new faces, but I think we're still talking about the same thing. And I wanted to first say thank you to the Watershed Health for all the work that you do. As you know, many of you have participated in the process of what we do at Sanitation in terms of how we monitor the LA River and our watershed. As you know, before 2007, and when we worked with Watershed Health, we were looking just at site-specific monitoring. We weren't looking at a comprehensive watershed approach. And with the help of the organization, it convened a lot of you to tell us what else we needed to do besides, looking at the whole system and looking at the science, but also looking at, more importantly, is how it was going to affect not only all the species within the river, but also, more importantly, the people next to the river who, many of you, without you, we wouldn't be, recreating along the LA River. So right now, you mentioned that I was appointed by the former administration, and please, I want to stay here. So those of you, who not only because, when I started in this work, you know, I wanted to be, you know, be on the outside with the nonprofits. That's why I think nonprofits play a very critical role in working with government. So having, you know, people on the inside-outside game is critical, and sanitation is an ally. But also, as we look at how the river is going to play a role in the next 50 years, and how when we look at climate change and the limited resource that we have, and, you know, at Sanitation now I get to help, you know, manage that system so that we use enough for recycled water, so we reuse it. And I know many of you are probably laughing because I was one of the people pushing to have more recreation. Now I get to be on the other side, making sure that we keep enough to recycle, but we also keep enough in the system, in the, you know, ecosystem, to make sure that people can enjoy the benefits of the Los Angeles River. So it's just exciting to be here. And like the executive director just mentioned, it is an ambitious agenda today, but I can always say since 2003, you have always been on the cutting edge of some of the issues that need to be addressed. And so I thank you for having an ambitious agenda. And I look forward to some of the discussions, and happy to be here to be one of the sponsors. And good luck to our efforts, and let's keep doing the work, because as somebody very wise said, the issues recycle back and forth, but it's how we address them and learning from our lessons is how we're going to move forward to address climate change and everything that we are trying to address in today's ambitious agenda. So now I would like to introduce a dear friend who has been doing this work for over 20 years as well, Miguel Luna.
It's not supposed to have audio, just so you know. It's not a glitch. Dennis Martin is a chef of a 2 Michelin star in Switzerland. And his restaurant's pretty particular because when you go, all you see are these tables with white linens. And there's no silverware, there's no glassware, there's nothing other than this 3-inch cow in the middle of it. And so diners come and, you know, they were told to be there at 7. It's 7 o'clock, they're looking around and where's the food? Suddenly, of all the tables, one person decides to pick up the cow from the middle of the table. And of course, the little cow makes a moo sound. The table starts laughing, and the other tables see their cow in the middle of their table, and they pick it up, and of course, moo. And all of a sudden, you have all these diners at their tables with their moos, but also with just so much laughter. And it is at that moment that the food comes out. And this is the genius of Dennis Martin in the sense that he has enhanced a moment. And we know that food tastes better when we're laughing, when we're joyous. We know that we're more receptive to information when we're laughing and we're joyous. And so I think we must engage differently. We know, because studies have shown that there's a probability of 30% more that people, when in company, will laugh than when they're alone. And we do have a pandemic of loneliness. in this country at the moment. And we know that when we're happy and when we're laughing, that food tastes better and just everything is much better. In Southeast LA, a collaborative of artists have been for the last 6 years in partnership with other artists, the community, agency, county flood control, the Public Works family, county parks. We've been setting the cow on the asphalt of the LA River. And so I just wanted to show you a little bit about what that is. This, by the way, took place in that same exact location of the river that I showed you at the beginning when I came up, when the river was flooded from side to side, right? This is when we talk about what do we do these other 364 days of the year in the river. There was a Ferris wheel down there, we had food trucks, 2 stages, and 5,000 people came down to enjoy the river that day. So I believe that if we can create experiences where people feel good being at the river, then perhaps we can start working towards making sure that people feel good about having a relationship with the river. My name is Miguel Luna. I like to say I work on 3 things: water, people, and smiles. So hopefully I get to do some of that today. I don't know, I gotta work on the smiles. I didn't hear any little chuckles at the end, but usually you get a chuckle. What you're hearing is just my perspective. It's not the perspective. Next we'll hear from our panelists and they'll give their point of view. And you know, mine was about beyond the banks of people in river, inside. I know you may get more of that, but you'll also get the outward. And how, as Barbara was saying, and Steve and Eileen alluded to, is that, you know, how are we connecting with communities and people beyond the banks to connect with each other and connect with the river? You know, I thought that maybe perhaps we bring it one speaker at a time and we let the others sit down so that they can also, so we don't put you up here and have to look at everybody, but rather also take in the presentations. So we'll do that. I do want to say that we want to get to a point where we interact with all of you as well through this panel. So I've asked our panelists to take 5 minutes to do that. You know, some rules is that there'll be you know, Christina will be in the front and will keep us on track with that time. Please follow that. If we get beyond the 5 minutes, I'll probably prompt you to, you know, finish your statement so that we can move on to the next person. And since we'll have a Q&A, I might as well lay out the rules for all of you, that we want to interact with all of you. Maybe what I'll do is take 3 questions consecutively so that we don't get stuck in one question and then it might take up too much time, and so we can interact that way. But I'm going to ask you, because we have the panelists here, let's hear from them. All of you, I mean, you could be up here too. But for today, I'm going to ask you to keep your question to a 30-second one, right? And that doesn't mean a 2-minute intro and then a 30-second question. You get 30 seconds total. And the cool thing is you have 30 minutes to start formulating that succinct 30-second question, as you're hearing the panelists, right? And just to help you even further on that, who, what, where, when, why are the questions. And then we'll get to network afterwards and we'll learn. And the panelists will be here throughout the day as well, and you'll get to interact with them for that. All right, so I think we've had a chance to talk offline, and by the way, I'm going to introduce people by their name alone, and I really appreciated Barbara that's what she did. Didn't go into a long bio, but they will tell you who they are, what they do, who they do it with, and ideally, why they do what they do. So let me bring up Dennis Mabasa.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to start us off with an activity that I typically do while we're leading cleanups. So I'm going to invite everybody to feel your heartbeat. Take a couple deep breaths in, feel your heartbeat. Recognize that the water that's flowing through your blood right now eventually will pass through your body, enter our urban water cycle, and go directly into the LA River. We're more connected to the LA River than we realize. And when we take care of the LA River, we take care of ourselves. And this is a really important piece that FOLAR cares about. We want the community, we want us to recognize that we are nature. The LA River is part of us. Today, while I'm here, like many of y'all, I care about our healthy watershed. I care about our healthy communities. And I also recognize that the LA River is really one of our greatest tools for climate resiliency. We believe that it cools our air, it cleans our temperatures, and it provides the biodiversity essential to our collective well-being. And that's why I'm here. My name is Dennis Mabasa. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Friends of the LA River. And gosh, I'm so excited to be here. So excited to see all of y'all working on the LA River, caring about our watersheds, caring about the people that live in our watersheds. Today I'm going to be talking about one of our community engagement programs here at FOLAR called the LA River Fellows. So let's get started. This is the first slide. Dennis Mabasa, once again, Chief Operating Officer of Friends of the LA River. And what you see in the background right here, this is a group of our 30 fellows. You'll see a little bit more about that program. So taking a step back, Friends of the LA River, who are we? We are an organization that builds capacity for communities, students, and future leaders to advocate for nature, climate, and equity on the LA River. We create opportunities for folks to learn about the LA River and love the LA River. What do? There's really three main components. We educate, which I'll talk about in depth in a bit. We activate, we create opportunities to take care of the river, volunteer, cleanups, habitat restoration, and we also advocate for an equitable, just restoration of the LA River. So some of our education programs, this is kind of a spectrum. So on the left, you'll see our breadth programs. We're trying to impact the most people possible. You'll see our Day of Discovery program, which is a partnership with LAUSD, where we work with thousands of students every single year, bring them to the LA River to learn about macroinvertebrates, to learn about the benefits of the LA River, and to learn about the fact that we actually have a river, because most students in LA that we work with, that I've worked with, are shocked, surprised to learn this fact. So that's one end of the spectrum. Today I'm going to be focusing on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, the River Fellowship. So this is our depth program, where we're working with a small group of youth over a long period of time. So this program started this year, actually. It's a paid career technical education and youth development program for high school-aged youth that come from communities underrepresented in STEM and conservation. Participants are given the opportunities, skills, and mentors and community to fully immerse themselves in a green career focused in environmental education, research, and advocacy. So at the very beginning of this, there's two important words: career technical education and youth development. Career technical education, it's so important to give youth the skills necessary to enter our workforce, but also youth development, community, the identity, the mentors, all of the, addressing all of the other barriers that exist to entering our workforce. So that's really what our program provides. So just for scale, we started this program this year, so in January. We opened it up and we had 86 applications for only 30 spots, which really shows us that youth are craving these types of opportunities. Youth want to be here. Youth want to be in a place where they could make decisions, where they could present to a group, and we just need to give them those opportunities. So I'm gonna skip a little bit because I'm running out of time. But these are where our students are coming from, so a couple different schools. And just hearing directly from the students, thank you. Just hearing directly from the students, Marissa Neal, I'm hoping to learn from this program ways for me, especially as a person of color, to find my way through the environmental science field and make a career of it. Itzel, I want to be able to serve my community and give back. With the LA River being close by and a source shared by many, I want to ensure its health and my voice heard through its fellowship. And lastly, Georgette, ever since I was little, I've always been worried about the climate because I would always see smoke from factories in the Philippines. And due to the poverty over there, I always saw the worst of environments. Ever since it's been getting worse globally, and I would like to be able to help the LA community become cleaner and also push our community towards going green. So these are the youth that care about our environments. They want to have a voice. We just need to give them opportunities. So there's some components that I'm gonna highlight. First off, youth and family orientation. So we're not just working directly with the youth, but we work directly with their families. We're building trust. Change happens at the speed of trust, and that's really a principle that we emphasize here within our programs. Next, we take them on a camping trip. We immerse them in nature. We build those communities. We create opportunities for them to love nature. We take them on a kayaking trip in the LA River. They get to hear from professional guest speakers, individuals like y'all, within the field, so they could learn about what potential careers they could enter. They receive a climate communication certification from the National Network of Oceanic and Climate Change Interpretation, so they could learn about climate change and communicate about it to their communities and other friends. They become educators within our network. They teach other youth about climate change and how the river is involved in climate change. And then lastly, after all of these community building workshops, they have a choice to enter one of 3 different project-based learning experiences. The first one is a phytomycoremediation project where youth are working with scientists from the Department of Biogeochemistry at UC Riverside. Youth are receiving a HAZWOPER certification, so they are doing hands-on research within this field and presenting it to leaders within the field. Next, there is a River Lab test plot where youth are working with USC students who they're working on cultural asset data mapping. There's a group of 5 USC students that just hiked the entire 51 miles of the LA River, and youth are directly working with them, creating opportunities for storytelling. And the third one is an environmental justice advocacy workshop, where youth learn about environmental justice and create action projects where they can get involved. Project Showcase, and finally, there's no cost to the program, and youth are compensated to participate in the program, just addressing another barrier. And finally, we're about 80% of the way through our first year program. This is a preliminary set of data, but some of the students are saying 100% of students reported an increase in understanding of eco-literacy concepts, 60% of students reported an increase in confidence, 50% reported an increase in environmental and climate action, and lastly, 40% increased interest in entering the green workforce. So this is just one of our programs. Really, really excited to continue the opportunities and looking forward to finding ways to collaborate with you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dennis. And Dennis, you could take a seat down there so you're not on the spot until all presenters. Next up, I'd like to invite Mr. Mark Stanley.
Good morning, everyone. All right. So I am Mark Stanley. I'm the Executive Officer of the Rivers and Mountains Conservancy. I also manage the Watershed Conservation Authority. And both do work throughout all of Los Angeles. But I'm going to talk to you specifically about our efforts along the lower Los Angeles River. In one campaign in particular, which you see up there, is Para Todos. And we began this effort basically in 2016. We went out to the community because of legislation to bring the community together along the lower half of the Los Angeles River. And when I say the lower half of the Los Angeles River, that's everything excluding the city of Los Angeles. So it's from Vernon down to Long Beach. It's about 19 miles. Includes about 14 different jurisdictions, and we also include the tributaries, the Rio Hondo River and the Compton Creek, both feeding into the Los Angeles River. So when most people see the lower half of the Los Angeles River, they think about the concrete that's in the channel, and that's mostly what it is. It's a lot of concrete with communities that align that concrete on both sides. I would say those are very vibrant communities. If you haven't visited much, I recommend you go down there and check it out, particularly the southeast, and you can continue all the way down to Long Beach where it empties out into the ocean. When you get below Willow Street in Long Beach, it does go back to soft bottom. Much of that area is brackish, even up until some of the concrete channel portion of it. So I mentioned we started this effort in 2016. It was under legislation. We started what was called the Revitalization Plan, and that was to take a look at opportunities along the lower half of the river, in the channel and along the banks. When we concluded that study in 2018, we brought the community together, had meetings every month, did pop-up events, had activities within the channel itself, gave people an opportunity to see what it's like to be in the riverbed. We wanted to make sure that we engaged them, so that 2-year effort in engaging them, they actually gave us feedback as to what they wanted to see along the lower half of the river. So RMC, I haven't talked a lot about what we are. We have so many different projects going on, and they're all across Los Angeles, but we have specific money just for the lower half of the Los Angeles River. And that includes millions of dollars for capital investment to build a number of these projects that people told us they'd like to see along the corridor. In that planning effort, we identified over 155 different project opportunities in the channel and along the banks of the river. So there's lots of opportunity for us to make investment. And we're looking to make that investment, and we've already started that. There's a number of projects that's either been completed or they're in construction right now. Well, you can imagine with that type of investment, there's going to be lots of opportunity from the private sector to look at investing as well. But through our Para Todos campaign, we want to make sure we go out to the community and we hear their voices as to what they want. Because the capital investment that we're making, we want to make sure it's for the people in the community. So we want to make sure that they have input into the process, that it's equitable, it's fair, and it's inclusive of their voices. And we're not going to build something that they don't tell us they want. So there's lots of planning that's going on. We have special funding for the corridor, which we get every year through state allocations of the budget. We have the climate bond coming up. We anticipate another allocation of funding for projects along the river. But throughout our Todos campaign, we're going to ask people what they like to see as opposed to us telling them what they should have in their communities. And we're just in the first part of that. We're gathering information because we know that a lot of plans have been developed along the lower half of the river. There's lots of people who have had interest in giving their input and what they think should be done. We want to make sure that we understand that before we start asking people questions, which we'll plan to do in about 9 months from now. We did ask people questions during the revitalization plan, and that's when we came up with a lot of different opportunities. I mentioned 155 of those. But we want to make sure we continue to be on the right track and we continue to have the community involved. Because what we want to prevent is displacement and gentrification, and that the people who live in those communities benefit from what's along the corridor. So, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to talk a little bit about what the Rivers and Mountains Conservancy is engaged in. We're looking for a pretty robust opportunity in getting out and speaking to the community.
Yeah, I want to thank the first two panelists for keeping on track. It's a good example for the rest of us now. And with that, Natalie, Donlin-Zapella, if you can join us. Thank you.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here. I'm Natalie Donlin-Zapella. How am I introduced here? Okay. So I am a principal at LeSar Development Consultants. My career has been, in the last 10 years, more focused on community development and affordable housing. But I am definitely a nature person. I see a lot of friendly faces out here. And I think I'm also here representing the La Rosa Coalition. We are the LA Regional Open Space and Affordable Housing Coalition, really about bringing together parks and housing and transportation leaders and experts and residents to really design more holistic neighborhoods and think about how we don't have to have a park or affordable housing. We really can and should have both and access to things that make life wonderful. So I'm here today to talk about Thriving in Place. This is about the Northeast LA Taylor Yard Equity Strategy. It's a similar effort in the Upper River to what Mark just spoke about. So it's a partnership with the City of Los Angeles and the 100-acre partners, which includes the California State Parks and Mountains Recreation Conservation Authority. And we're also working with Resource Legacy Fund, UCLA, and La Rosa as a coalition of nonprofits and other stakeholders and advocates. So this is the Taylor Yard section of the LA River. It is a 100-acre park development that's happening in Northeast LA, and it's a contaminated former rail storage yard and surrounded by communities that have for a long time been experiencing the impacts of living in a community with pollution, freeways, not a lot of access to the river, and a lot of change that has happened in these communities over the years. You can see here the little yellow banana in the middle is the 100-acre site, just to give you some context. And our UCLA partners have been doing a lot of work to understand the communities surrounding this section of the river in Northeast LA, and we found out that I think it's about over 40% or 50% of the residents are rent burdened, so they're dealing with a lot of instability in their communities around housing. These communities have been gentrifying a lot already, and it's predominantly Latino community now, but has had a lot of people displaced already and a lot of different cultural communities in this area. The reason why this is important to me is because I'm from this area. So half of my background is indigenous to California, and the other half are this beautiful family right here. This is my Italian family, immigrated over to Northeast LA, grew up in Lincoln Heights, and lived and played and worked in these communities for over 50 years, and I grew up spending my time enjoying the space, and definitely identify as an East Sider more than a West Sider in LA, and call this place home. I also was eloped and got married in this area, right underneath Dodger Stadium, as my family was about to go to a game, and then my husband and I took off and traveled up the coast to get a long weekend. So I have a lot of memories here, and it's a really special place. And what's wonderful is that I get to work with amazing people that are really dedicated and trying to do the best that we all can together to bring this forward. So I mentioned the core team. This is our launch team. City of LA put out a request for interest. La Rosa was able to successfully win that, and we're collaborating with the 100-acre partnership, which is the partners that are developing the 100-acre site. LA Neighborhood Land Trust is serving as our lead organizing team, and UCLA is leading as the research team. Members of La Rosa have been guiding and setting up the process with us: Trust South LA, Trust for Public Land, SECA, and NRDC. And then Resource Legacy Fund has been serving as a fiscal sponsor and investor in the work, along with many of these same partners. And I'm with LeSar to help bring the project forward. These pictures are from a strategy session we held before we actually officially launched. And the goal was to, after we had done initial research and looked at a lot of the plans that the UCLA team poured over, to basically socialize our outreach and engagement plan for Northeast LA. It's a community that has gone through a lot of planning around the LA River, and we wanted to be really thoughtful about how we approached so that we can engage people that haven't been included, and also those that have and are feeling maybe overburdened by all the planning efforts and the length of time it takes for these projects to come to fruition. So this is a picture of that strategy session, and we got a lot of great feedback from our partners, many of which you see here, and some of you may have been there, so thanks for coming. And then in terms of our work, so we had that pre-launch session in March, and so since before that time and since, we've been pouring over a lot of research and planning efforts. So UCLA did this really in-depth neighborhood analysis looking at demographics. They reviewed all of the existing plans from around this area. Not all of them, but many of them, because there's over 140. And then they developed an asset map, a map of publicly owned lands. We've been meeting with a lot of the community-based organizations. There's a lot of rich work being done there. Many of them are here today. And we had the pre-launch strategy session, and we've been developing workforce development and housing stability policy analysis to inform the work. And we've also been, through our outreach, building out a Northeast LA kind of community power and leadership database, so we know who to continue engaging with as we move forward. And this picture is from one of our events, where we were soliciting feedback from people on what we can do to prevent green gentrification. So our community engagement has been a really thoughtful process led by LA Neighborhood Land Trust, and you'll see some pictures of our team in a moment. They've really been focusing on moving at the speed of trust and really recognizing when and how people are able to engage with this process because of the planning efforts that are already going on currently and have in the past. So we've been starting that work initially through working with community-based organizations in Northeast LA. And then we've been doing a lot of one-on-one in-depth interviews with community members, both in English and Spanish. And we've been attending, one of the recommendations we got is to actually go to the community instead of hosting our own meetings. So we've been listening to that and actually attending other workshops that are happening in the community, and being able to leverage where people are already going and engaged to support and inform this process for Taylor Yard's equity strategy. And then we're hosting 2 community workshops. We just had one last week on tenant rights, and we have another one coming up on how to get access to affordable housing, since that's a major issue coming up. And we've been raising funds to support the local organizations and the equity strategy. So here's some pictures. You'll see Julie Gonzalez, our organizer, who's from Lincoln Heights as well, doing outreach at one of the events. And then this is at the Senior Center, where we had a workshop, I think just last week or the week before. And here we are at the Fuller River Festival and the LA Moss community exchange that was just held the other weekend. And you see Bees and Jack are on our outreach team there, and this the Stay Housed LA workshop, where we were able to support tenant rights education. And in terms of what we've been hearing, these are the top priorities being identified so far. Housing affordability and stability in general has been the resounding theme, and 68% of people have prioritized that. We are going through a second round of analysis of our data to identify if that's still the case, based on more outreach that we've done. And we're planning to put all this together to do a first draft of the equitable development strategies that Northeast LA is prioritizing as we transition into a second phase of the work. So thank you so much, and I'll pass it back.
Thank you, Natalie. Next, and by the way, are you formulating your questions? Bringing it down to that 30-second level? LB, Nai, if you can join us. Oh. I'll get you back to it. Sorry, we gave a preview of is this you? No. No, not yet. There we go. Okay, we'll come back to it.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Hi, so I'm LB Nye. I'm with the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board. I'm super glad to be here today. I want to talk to you a little bit about this real important project that we have. I'm a technical person by nature. You know, I deal with data and policy, by education, by practice. That's who I am. But I'm super glad for this conference and for a renewed emphasis that we have at the water boards to make sure that we're actually serving all of our communities, and in particular disadvantaged communities and tribes, which we haven't historically, honestly, been that good at. So we have a renewed emphasis on that, and so I'm grateful for this opportunity to be here today. I think, you know, I care a lot about my job and doing a good job, protecting the environment, protecting public health, and this helps me do that job better. So the first thing I wanted to do was tell you just a little bit about the water boards, because I find there's a lot of agencies that have the word water in their name, water districts, water divisions. We're the water board. We're a state of California agency. So this is the LA Water Board. So this is, you know, the LA Water Board works in this region, but we're still the state of California. There's other water boards for other regions in California. And we protect the natural water bodies. We don't have anything to do with drinking water. It's lakes, rivers, streams, coastal waters. And we include, you can see, the entire LA River watershed. Our boundaries are mostly watershed boundaries. So the approach that we use to protect water quality, we have a lot of tools that we use to protect water quality, but one of the basic approaches that we have is we first figure out how the water is being used. We identify the beneficial uses, and then we protect the water in order to protect those uses. So The classic example is recreation. Most of the water bodies in the LA region are designated with recreation as a use. Therefore, we protect the water. We have water quality standards to protect public health so people can swim without getting sick. These beneficial uses, these are our newest beneficial uses. These were this is a tribal, traditional, and cultural use, a tribal subsistence fishing, and subsistence fishing. Subsisting fishing was adopted at the same time. It's not tribal, but the two top ones we call the tribal beneficial uses. And these are really the results of advocacy at the State Water Board. Tribes and other parties working closely with the State Water Board developed these definitions. And the Los Angeles Water Board has adopted these definitions to use in our region. And all of the other regional water boards, either they have adopted them or in the process of adopting them for use. So these will be throughout the state of California. So that's nice, but that's just step one. Now we have to identify which water bodies, specifically which water bodies these beneficial uses apply to. And that's a pretty big step. And it's something we haven't done before. I mean, we've had the same beneficial uses and the same designations for many years. We rarely change them. So this is kind of a new project for us. And obviously, the tribal beneficial uses, we really need to be working in close partnership with tribes. We're not going to designate any water body with a tribal beneficial use if the local tribes haven't confirmed for us that that's an appropriate action to take. So, let me check my notes. This is what's exciting about this for me. This is the first time we've had a cultural beneficial use, which is kind of surprising to me when I think about it. I mean, obviously, waters are important to all of us in ways that are more than just the practical. Let's not get sick when swim in them, and let's have healthy fish. Kind of uses. So this is, I think, an important step for the water boards, and it's a real high priority. So let's see if I have any. Oh, so like I said, this is a high priority for the water boards. We expect and hope to be working closely with tribes, and I hope to have the opportunity to talk to a lot of all of you today about this project. That's all I have.
Thank you, LB. I'm curious as to, and LB, so you could start thinking about it. What, as you mentioned, even you question culture has always played a role in water. So why now? So there you go. I'm going to ask you that later. Next up, I'd like to invite Gabriella Crowe to the podium.
Miha, and good morning, everyone. As you can see, I have a very long title. I just wanted to make sure that I included everything in it, just so you know exactly what my talk is about. Good morning. My name is Gabrielle Crowe. I am the Vice Chair as well as the Secretary for Environmental Sciences for the Gabrielino-Shoshone Tribal Council of Southern California. I am also a cultural and environmental education consultant with the Biono Wetlands Land Trust. I'm also part of several MPA collaboratives, Marine Protected Area collaboratives, basically trying to do anything and everything to protect my ancestral lands and waters. So if you have any questions, I put contact info afterwards. Okay. So Wishkunaha, I'm very happy to be here this morning. It's an incredible opportunity to be a person that actually has a Western scientific education and has been brought up and working in a career for 18 years in environmental education, but also now with more of the ability with many organizations like yourselves to actually really recognize the importance to have tribal components to this and tribal engagement, but not only engagement, but also having us in the part of the process with education, because I think that everyone that lives in the LA watershed and in Southern California and many places, whatever community they find and they call home now, they really want to make sure that they're taking care of it, and that's just an integral part of what we're doing on a daily basis. So thank you. So as you can see my title better in the last slide. So this is just a picture depicting what our watershed used to look like before. So now, for all of you that are in your career now, and everyone that's here today, you all obviously know what it looks like now. But this is just a picture depicting all of our different village sites that were along the LA River. And so back then, the river was a living and breathing entity. And you can see villages were plentiful near it. And at the time, the people living there were actually taking care of the river, just as the river was taking care of them. So obviously, things have changed in the past few hundred years. A lot of development, a lot of other things. But I think that, you know, sometimes we can get stuck in the past, but I also feel like there's an opportunity here for us to all have a brighter future together if we're working together. So here, this is a picture actually depicting Bayona. So I like to use this a lot, especially when I'm doing education with students, because my number one question that I have is, or comment is, I thought everyone died because there's not enough education out there that's telling them that we are still living here and taking care of the land now. So we always have and always will be taking care of this. So it's just a very good depiction, even telling little kids as young as, like, you know, the students that normally we're teaching, like even first graders, that everyone had a job and responsibility in the village. And so I think at times, that a lot of times we overlook the fact that, like, kids hold a lot of power too. I know myself, I have 3 children myself, and it's just, kids can actually take on jobs and actually be very good environmental stewards. And I think that they have a great opportunity, especially living in Los Angeles, to be able to do that. So sometimes what's missing, though, is that educational component and empowering them to realize that they can actually be making a difference, even at a young age. So this is just pictures of what it looks like now. So since I do a lot of my educational work in the Bayona Creek and Bayona wetlands, these are just some pictures that were taken actually by our president of our organization. So you can see that in the areas where there is water and there's a soft bottom in the riverbed, there's a lot of life living there. And it's also our job and responsibility to take care of these different animals that not only find this place and make it their home, but they also travel from different places to actually nest in areas in Los Angeles. And it's our job to protect those areas so that they nest and they do come back. So these are just some pictures of me actually teaching with our watershed model that we have. I've actually been teaching about watershed education for about 16 years now. Before, I used to work in the Ocean Institute in Dana Point, so we talked about it obviously in South Orange County. But in Los Angeles, it's just as important, especially when we're talking about the fact that Bayona is such a unique place because it's our last coastal wetlands that we have in Los Angeles. And so showing kids why it's so important to have that last filtration system, that these plants and these organisms can actually use these extra things that are coming in from human impact before it ends up in the ocean, which ultimately, you know, causes problems. But we're also talking about, well, what can we do to fix these things? And I think that a lot of times what's lacking is there's a lot of scientific research and data being collected, but it's also, there's a disconnect between that and those communities that are actually going to be directly affected by these. And also, I think that those communities would like to know how they can better help their own community and better help the environment. And I think that sometimes there's a lack of communication between the two. So that's where environmental education comes in, but also not only talking about the environment today, but also having that cultural environmental literacy that's talking about why this plant is important now, why it was important thousands of years ago, and what you can do to be protecting these plants and organisms for the future. And so, of course, using these watershed models is just a really cool, fun way to do it. You use like chocolate sprinkles to have animal waste and other things. So the kids like doing it too. But it's fun for them, but also they really like think about it because, you know, you're talking about, well, even if I live further inland, like how can I directly affect that? It's all of us are connected to the waterways that are eventually going to end up and pollute somewhere. So what can we do in the process to help prevent that? And so this is very long-winded, a lot of things, but it's a lot of the stuff that we've already been talking about, that just having those partnerships with tribal governments is important, but even doing land acknowledgements is like the first step. It's just acknowledging that, but also what are we going to do to build that relationship and build that trust? Because honestly, my grandmother started doing this work many, many years ago, and I just happen to be lucky enough to be continuing this legacy to do this. But at the same time, even in the last few years that I've been more active doing this, I can see how people can get very burnt out because promises are not kept, but also we're in the unique field where people, honestly, you have to, if you live and work in Los Angeles, it's expensive, and sometimes you move into a different position to better take care of your family. But I urge you, in cases like that, to continue building relationships and continue passing on those knowledge with those relationships that you've already built, because a lot of times things get lost, and tribal people have a lot on their plate, and we're at capacity a lot of times, and it's really difficult to start from square one and to continue on that work when we have a lot of other important work to do. So just have, as many times as possible, have either tribal advisory groups or tribal advisory committees, making sure you're working government to government, making sure that you reach out. Even if you reach out again. It's not necessarily that we don't want to do the work, it's just that maybe we're at capacity and we'll have to try and find somebody that can do that work for you. So, like I said at the bottom, obviously we cannot go back and rewrite history, but this is creating a new opportunity, unique opportunity to create a brighter path forward for all of us. So I know I do it for myself, and I do it for our nation, I do it for my kids, but also I'm not just thinking about that, I'm also thinking about their kids and the next 7 generations. So it's a lot to hold on to, but there's a lot of power and responsibility, but I think we can all do it if we're all working together. So thank you.
Okay, as we're getting ready for our last speaker, the panelists after Rudy will come on up and join the stage. Next up, Rudy Ortega Jr.
Amiyatam Natawan Rudy Ortega Jr. Nanoni Basivitam Tataviam Tomiarcham. Hello everyone, my name is Rudy Ortega Jr. I'm the tribal president of the Fernandeño Tataviam Band of Mission Indians. And here to present a little bit of the tribe and the work that we do in our community, and what I serve on today as well is I'm the chairman of the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. I'm a board member of Mountain Recreational Authority with MRCA. I serve on the Los Angeles City County Native American Indian Commission, among things that I do. But one of the things important about it is making sure tribal people are representative in these places. Because if you talk about native plants, spaces, signage, and everything, but no native people there, you're not really talking about the atmosphere and the land itself. You're talking about how to repair or restore something that was already pristine before. And so we've been curators in, pretty much land folks that have operated on these lands and lived on it for centuries. So I want to show a little bit of the work that we're doing. My tribe have created a couple organizations, one of them called the Tataviam Land Conservancy. As a tribe that's state recognized, and passively the state says that because there's no real formal process of state acknowledgement, but yet we're on the Heritage Commission for the state of California. And I bring that up because that's the history California has towards Native people, is not as vibrant or beautiful as we see the missions today. There's a dark history towards it. But we're looking beyond that. How do we repair it, and how do we have the engagement and conversations? So for that, the tribe created a couple of organizations, one of them Tataviam Land Conservancy, and that's in response to the lack of federal acknowledgement and holding our own trust lands. Lands that we can go do ceremonial practices without filing permits. Lands that we can do a traditional bivat ceremonies, which is tobacco, blowing smoke tobacco, which is very no-no today in a lot of spaces. But how do you do it when you're cultural and that's your religious practices? So it's important to have a space that we can do so. And so our land conservancy is in charter to go after and pursue and protect lands and restore lands and bring lands back to our tribe's hands. So rather than waiting for land return, we're acquiring our own lands back. From Mulholland Boulevard all the way up to the Kern County line, there's properties that the Conservancy has looked and identified alongside private developers and local authorities to move land into our hands. So the project that we're doing along the LA River, or Orit in our language, and Pami in the language for Gabrielino people, our languages are very close to one another, just a slight little difference in dialect. And even the way we say hello to one another, ha means hi, haminat means hello, meyuam is hello in Kuya, miia is hello in Gabrielino, haku is hello in Chumash. My people, my ancestors spoke all those dialects and languages. That's how intelligent they were and were able to care for the land. But here's a map of the LA River tributaries. Along with it, there's a lot of places that are highlighted in the villages in the map below it, and areas that are being identified as signage. There's some names today that even when I walk around in the city of Los Angeles, we say Tahunga or Pacoima or Topanga, and many people think it's Spanish words. They say, oh, isn't it Spanish? No, it's history. But there's no real information about these places. You know, even Hahamanga, you know, there's all these different names that are still there. We don't have to advocate to put places in our ancestral names. It's there. But what we need to do is put information about them and that the people that descend from us. In my tribe's practice, there's two things. One, our history is that we were culminated, we were brought into Mission San Fernando, we were baptized. And all the different languages I said hello in, that region spoke in all those different languages. And so how do you address a very multi-complex cultural practices in such a small place, especially in San Fernando Valley? In San Fernando Valley, they would have spoke Chumash language, Pipi Madam language, Pacific Thumb language, Akaviet Thumb language, which is pretty much saying Fernandeño, Chumash, Gabrielino, and Serrano languages today. So how do you do it in the San Fernando Valley that's appropriate and fair and accurate to the villages? More so, paying tribute to the ancestors from that village. Myself, I descend from the village of Situkanga, which is down the bottom. Situkanga means the place of the oak tree. If you're in the place, you will say Situkanga. If you're talking about it, you'll say Situkangva. Situkangva. That's Encino area. So we want to put signage in there because my tribe descends, 70% of the tribe descends from Situkanga, one of the villages. My ancestral background comes to the village of Chaiwananga, which is by present-day Magic Mountain. The village of Tapu, which is in Simi, so I have Chumash ancestry as well. So it's important to identify in the village of Tochonanga, which is right in the bottom of Santa Cruz Valley when you're going from San Fernando into Santa Cruz. So it's important to identify these areas and the villages and what they mean, the history behind it. This village here is so special to my line and family line. We're talking about my great-great-grandmother who had fought to preserve 4,400 acres of property and lost it. At the time, she was only 18, 19 years old. She was a tribal leader, and we call her Mahisehar, a woman leader, a captain, to lead that village. And during that time when people were being removed from their villages, her village, Encino Village, our village there, was a safe haven for other villages nearby. So our relatives from Tuhanga, or Tahunga, came from Tahunga into Encino to preserve and to be protected, because it was a very harsh time to be native. More so, being an indigenous woman and leading a nation there at the time. So she had a lot of obstacles. So the things we want to do is identify a lot of these villages, bring histories. So these are some of the signage projects that we have that we're identifying with our team, with our nonprofit, the Tataviam Conservancy, who our staff is, working very tirelessly and identifying the history and going through it. And even they go through it, they bring it up to leadership when we say, well, we may not want to say that story or that's too much story. Because it's the right type of signage, right? How much time it's kind of like Facebook, but on the wall, all right? how much time that person is going to sit there and read it, right? And they're even doing it in Spanish as well. So it's that kind of information, and that's what we want to do is spotlight these areas on the park of Encino, which is a state park that's a remaining portion of the property of the 4,400 acres, but also adjacent around it too. So when you're driving Ventura Boulevard, man, I wish we would have had that property, right? That's a pristine property. But if you drove down Encino Ventura Boulevard and you drove by, you would have the signage there. We'll talk about the history. And they're working about how much more integration they have. Does it go to a website that talks further about the history? Or even hear some songs if you went to a website, an audio. So many different things along with the signage project that they're working on. And again, this is funded through the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, looking to really expand further, bring education alongside the river. So when you're traveling, if you're kayaking, if you're walking alongside the river, you can learn about the history and origins of the river and the people that was there, right? Because if we don't know our history, then we're not really expanding or bringing education in. And if you want to talk about how to preserve much more of the properties and the lands that we're on, and you want tribal ecological knowledge, you got to be respectful to the people who retains it and to share for it. You know, for years with my tribal communities, my elders, we spoke very lightly of it for two reasons. And I like to be honest. One thing, the village that the map that I show you, many villages, I come from the village of Situkanga. My cousin's here, he comes from the village of Tahunga. And that's pretty much it. It's in the valley. So a lot of people, if you caught it, are not here with us from all these different villages. But we're here caretakers and protectors, so we protect it because there's so many artifacts on it. And that's relations to the signage that we're doing, because we believe in sharing the knowledge. And that's the other part of, why we didn't share before. One, they only came and took. And the fact that the village not being there, a lot of information, as each village was here and not here, that's the same thing for our cultural knowledge. We didn't retain 100% of it, unfortunately. And if you walk into the mission walls, there's paintings in there that were actually displaying some of the cultural artifacts or information of our people that were translated from native to Catholicism. So those are the translations that we had. But this is what we found important. So there's a map there on the bottom. I don't know if they had our tribal map larger on there. But here you can take a look at our website. I encourage you to visit our tribal website. We have a tribal map that depicts a lot of our tribal boundaries. But this signage project is in the San Fernando Valley for the tributaries to really emphasize in tribal culture, the villages, pathways of areas, and sharing the information as well. The Conservancy that we have, the Tataviam Land Conservancy, is also working on a book that if you go hiking, you can flip through it and you can learn a little bit more about the tribal knowledge on the native plant species. So that's what we're really excited about. One, because there's naming out there, but there's no information about the naming about it. And we really want to bring that to you all, to hear in the public as well, so they can learn more about the tribal communities overall, that we share these spaces. It's not just one tribe overall. Each village was autonomous. And I like to say that because we are overlapping between our tribal nations. And especially the San Fernando Valley, as I mentioned, we got Chumash ancestry there, Serrano ancestry there, Pipimara, which is we refer to as Gabrielino heritage is there as well. So bringing us to the table, as Gabrielle mentioned earlier, is important to have the conversation with all of us so that you can bring the information further out. But definitely the signage project, we're looking to launch off next year. So right now we're capitalizing on the places that were best identify these areas of markers and information, and the amount of history to be shared as well as there. So thank you very much for your time.
As you all are thinking about your questions and building up the courage to walk up to the microphone, and all it takes is one person. It's like the buffet once you get, so just be that brave person. And I'll give you a minute to ask your question. How about that? The first person that comes up gets a minute. Oh, I see someone rushing up. See? And as he comes up, there was a word that was used, and I always like to unpack them because, you know, it could mean something to one person. And I heard the word trust, at the pace of trust. So, and it's not one or the other, but I know that for entities wanting to do this with tribes, it's a different, trust means something different. So perhaps I heard you, Natalie, mention trust, and I heard you, Dennis, mention trust, and then if you could define what that is for you, how do you build that trust? What is that pace? And then perhaps Rudy and Gabrielle, if you could share your thoughts on what trust means to you. And then, yeah, perfect. That's your chair right there. All right, Natalie, and then we're going to have Dennis, and then Rudy and Gabriel.
Okay, I wasn't prepared for this.
I know, this is it.
No, it's good. I guess the way that we've been talking about building trust, La Rosa is a regional, county-wide coalition, and many of our team members have roots or live in Northeast LA. But I'm trained as a community organizer, and so entering into a community, which in a way we certainly were as a coalition, is an important thing to be thoughtful about, because you're entering into a place that has a rich history and beauty and tensions, and you know, a certain level of trust needs to be developed in order to have meaningful conversations. And I think for us, that really meant starting with leaders that exist in the neighborhoods and in the communities, and moving slowly so that and doing our own work so that we can come in more informed. And we really focused more on going deep with leadership and residents that have lived and worked and played in Northeast LA. So rather than doing big, large events, it was more about building stronger relationships and really listening, and not trying to bring in and drive an agenda, but really listening, honoring, and letting the community drive the work.
Thank you, Natalie. Dennis, you want to add to that?
Yeah. So I shared a quote: "Change happens at the speed of trust," which is a principle that I pulled from emergent strategy. But I also interchangeably like to use the phrase "change happens at the speed of relationships." To build trust, you're building direct relationships with individuals, not as an organization to organization, but person to person. And just like Natalie said, it's about listening to the needs of that. You're building friendships, and just like you would build a friendship with somebody, you want to make sure that you're not only taking from that friend, it has to be a reciprocal relationship, and that's really how trust is built.
Thank you for that. Rudy, and then Gabrielle, I want you to close this on there.
How honest do you want me to be?
Very.
And how raw do you want me to be?
1 minute.
No, I think, I'm thinking as you mentioned that and as we explain it, one thing I can go back to is my father and other mentors that I have. I went on the path for spirituality where I'm a traditional bear dancer. And the leaders that spoke to me had talked to me about tribal communities and those that are not part of our tribal communities. And the people who are not part of our tribal communities, when they come talk to us, there's two-sided agenda. And they always told me, you give them one cheek today, Rudy, you give them the next cheek tomorrow. Because the story will always change. Even though they say, trust me, it's not the same. And when you look at our tribal communities who was lost a vast here in Los Angeles County, where we have 0 lands, and we're at the verge of requiring our own lands, purchasing our own lands, it's an effort. So trust, we trend lightly on it. It's another word to use, but the commitment. We want people to be upfront and do what they intend to do. If they say, hey, we're not going to be able to give you a signage project, that's fine. We know where we're at. That's what we prefer, is honesty.
Thank you for that, Rudy. Gabrielle?
Well, I think that a lot of times that when we're asked for a consultation or something, I think that really we want to be able to have a conversation with the person first before they ask us to do something. So even in our own community, if I was going to ask my uncle, who's the chairman of our nation, something, I don't just be like, hey, Uncle Nick, can you tell me this? It's, let's have a conversation, let's have coffee, I'll bring over something to eat, we'll do something. And it's not just about what are you going to be doing for me, it's a, you know, that's even just a starting point. And I feel like a lot of that was really lost because of COVID and those kind of interactions. A lot of times I'll get a phone call or it's a Zoom meeting or something else, and at times it can feel frustrating, but it's really like sometimes you really just have to remind people to kind of scale back things and really say, what am I committing to, or what are you going to benefit from, and who's going to benefit more from this? And sometimes it can be frustrating, but also I feel like if you're really honest at the beginning of it, then you can really tell whether or not it's kind of checks the box kind of situation, or whether or not you're really trying to build a meaningful, lasting relationship that's going to be from a project from start to finish, even in the beginning stages of planning versus, oh, well, we also have this set amount of money that's going to go towards tribal engagement, and even then dealing with a government and also looking at the tribal community as well. It's not just, I mean, obviously it's getting in contact with those tribal governments first, but also like, what are we also going to be doing for the tribal community while we're doing this? And so it's just, there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of moving factors, but it's just, it's gonna take work on both ends, but also reminding yourself that when tribal people are at capacity, that's one thing, but also a lot of times people are already getting paid to do these positions and have these meetings and other things, and we're coming on our own time because we know that's something of significance, but also we want to be making putting our best effort where we think it fits best. If that makes sense.
Thank you. It does, very much so. Thank you, Gabrielle. And Christina, if you could give me a 5-minute when we're all supposed to get off the stage, that would be very helpful. Okay, thank you. Sir, you get the minute.
Thank you. This question is for Mark, but maybe for everybody to give some idea about.
Sure.
So I've seen some maps that show the lower LA River area, like in North Long Beach, has a lot of vulnerable communities to what's called the 100-year flood event, which might be coming more frequently with climate change and different types of storms. So my question is, like, how high is that on the priority of everybody to either improve the flow of the LA River out to the ocean, or maybe have more permeable streets to prevent so much flow into the LA River? And do those communities also affect tribal zones, or are they more like different areas?
What's your name?
My name is Robert.
Thank you, Robert. So Mark, why don't we start with you, and if someone else wants to also add on to that.
I'll take the first part, someone else can speak towards the tribal aspect. In terms of what we're doing along the corridor, when we conducted the revitalization study, there was a lot of discussion as to whether we could widen the river. There's a lot of challenges to that, obviously. The water, once it gets out of the city of Los Angeles, needs to move very quickly, else it's going to flood those communities, which is why you have that concrete channel in the first place, is to move that water out quickly towards the ocean. If we were to look at things like widening the river, we would actually flood the communities. The river would have to be up to 5 times as wide as it is. We don't have the opportunity to do that because the communities are built up to those levee walls. So there's not an opportunity basically to take that concrete out. And perpet walls were actually added to the height of the levee. That was so we could make sure we manage even larger floods, things that are like over 100-year opportunities. With climate change, that's of course is more of a concern, that we may have unpredictable events even more often. So it is part of our concern, protection of those communities and what that flow of water is going to be like in the future. We don't know. but we're trying to look at ways that we can help manage that. The communities down in Long Beach, I had mentioned in the presentation, Willow Street, it goes back to soft bottom. And there are several different type of management effects that they put in the channel to control that water once it goes back to soft bottom. It's a little bit wider, it's a little bit flatter, the levee walls are a little bit lower. So that is somewhat of a concern, knowing that we're likely to have sea level rise in the future.
Thank you, Mark. LB, does water quality play a role in the question? Can you?
In the question of flooding?
Of flows in the river.
Sure, and the, you know, that's, even in the LA River, it's been a really important question to us as we look at promoting more recycling. You know, the water boards have always promoted people recycling the water, not just let it, you know, run down to the ocean, you know, from the sewage treatment plants, the water treatment plants, to recycle the water instead of putting it into the river. But then at the same time, you need a certain amount of water in the river to support the aquatic organisms and recreation in the river. There was a project a few years ago called the LA Flows Project, which was the state water board mostly, but with the LA Water Board participating and a bunch of other organizations looking at, you know, how to model that so that they'd have a tool for asking that, you know, for asking that question. What happens if we take, you know, 80% of the water from the water treatment plants out, or what happens if we have a storm of a certain size, to see what all the you know, the downstream effects should be, including flooding. So that didn't really get us to a point where we were making decisions. We can't do this or we should do that because of the risk of flooding, or because we need to maintain enough water in the river for the aquatic organisms or for recreation. But at least we have that tool, the LA Flows tool, for kind of modeling some of the answers to that question. It does get harder and harder, though, with climate change, because, you know, we're looking for, everybody's looking for opportunities to do restoration along the river, to bring back more plants. And then, you know, the flood control agencies, the Army Corps of Engineers or the county flood control agency will point out, you know, that increases our risk of flooding communities here, and we don't want that. Thank you, LB. It'd be interesting to hear from others. You know, we're talking about, the question was about the flows in the river, but if our panel is about beyond the banks, we can go outside the banks into the watershed, in the LA River watershed, and maybe Fola or someone else can talk about the opportunities that exist before that water gets into. I know that there's a need for flood management in these. I mean, when we saw the most recent storm event, there was a need to move that water. But what about opportunities in the watershed to capture that water when it's not those torrential? Anybody have thoughts on that? Go ahead. Dennis, it looks like you
sure,
reached
yeah.
for the microphone. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you were looking at me. When I work with students, or when I used to work with students, we teach them about a watershed approach to taking care of the LA River and managing floods. The students recognize when it rains, all that water goes directly into the river, but oftentimes what is new to them is to recognize when we have permeable pavement, when we have, you know, park space, when you have green space, that water is able to enter the groundwater table where it rains. So, you know, what we teach to students is what we advocate to our communities. We want to look at the flood protection control of the LA River, not just within the channel, but within our entire watershed. How can we create more access or opportunities for permeable pavement, more park space, more places where the water can enter the groundwater where it falls? But that's our thoughts.
Thank you, Dennis. Anybody else want to add to that? Go ahead, LB.
I will say, you know, many of the municipalities are taking on projects now that, you know, put in permeable pavement or put in detention basins or retention systems so that the water has a chance to soak in before it makes it to the river. And it doesn't necessarily make a big difference in a really big storm, when you have like the 100-year storm or the 50-year storm, because all of that will get quickly overwhelmed and there'll still be a huge amount of water in the river. But those things do make a big difference in water quality. So all the smaller storms are sinking into the river instead of washing off the streets and running into the river. So for the risk of the 50-year storm, the 100-year storm, I don't think those projects make a big difference, but they make a lot of difference for water quality. So.
Thank you, LB. Does anybody have a question from the audience? Really? Yeah, thank you. And your name and your, you didn't come first, so you have 30 seconds for your question.
I got two. One's a thought, second's a question.
Oh, here we go.
Rudy, it'll be under 30. Rudy, I do want to thank you for your honesty, and you are not alone in feeling like the story changes. So that is not just you, it is a large body of community members. And then I think it's Natalie. My question is for you. With your outreach group, your lead being driven by a housing related or entity, how do you ensure that a diverse amount of voices and community members are heard within your radius of Taylor Yard?
Thank you.
Thank you. I also want to say thank you to all the panelists. I had such a great time listening to all of your presentations. So that's a great question, and that's, I think, what's beautiful about the La Rosa Coalition is it's not just housing. It's about parks, transit, mobility. We've had partners that represent community advocate youth organizing. We have folks that focus on small business and micro-entrepreneurs be a part of the group. So that's what La Rosa is about. It's about kind of de-siloing the conversations and bringing folks together and utilizing the networks of our members to try to build those bridges. You know, it's been an unfunded collaborative for most of its life. It started in 2016. So it's really been a labor of love. And, you know, I think the organizing team has been really thoughtful about that. And, you know, we're just getting started too. Like, this isn't very old yet. We're in our infancy. And we also believe that it's not La Rosa that should be leading this work, that it really should be folks based and living in Northeast LA. So that's part of our strategy and why we've been focusing on not just outreach to the residents and small businesses, but also organizations, and looking at opportunities to help utilize our resources to help support them in getting stronger in the work that they're doing. So as an example, we applied for an Environmental Protection Agency grant and met with 3 of our partners that have been doing organizing in Northeast LA for some time. FOLAR was one of them, LA Mas, and Mujeres de la Tierra. And, you know, to the point made earlier about having a conversation, it was about listening to them and asking them, what are your priorities based on your work and long history in these neighborhoods, and what are you trying to push forward? And we built in those bodies of work, including the fellowship program at FOLAR, into the grant proposal, so we can help bring money to support them in their ongoing work and see how that connects back to the Taylor Yards equity strategy. Our hope is that the equity strategies will cover all the areas that are identified and prioritized through our work and collaboration, but we have limited resources right now. We're trying to be honest about that and what actual capacity we have. I'll be honest, it's been very hard work. I've never been burned out by a project more than this one. And I think I need a respite for some time, but I'm deeply committed to it at the same time. And I just really am grateful to my collaborators in this work, because we've all been pitching in for each other, and I know there's a lot of dedicated partners, including the city and the 100-acre partners. So, you know, our job is really to try to listen, like I mentioned earlier, and then connect the prioritized needs to experts in the LA and other areas to help bring in the right services, or even better, like support homegrown efforts in Northeast LA to flourish.
Thank you, Natalie. Gabrielle, one of the bullet points on the penultimate slide in your presentation pointed guidance should be sought at the beginning of a project. Could you share a little bit of what sort of guidance should people be asking for, and what do you expect out of, what's a good outcome out of that expectation?
Well, I think that, like I said before when I was up talking, I think that a lot of times these different organizations, a lot of them that are here today, they develop a land acknowledgement, and obviously it takes work to go into doing that, right? But we also think that the land acknowledgement is just the first step. So if you're already recognizing the land that you're on and the original caretakers of that land, then it's a responsibility to get to know those people and already have, and hopefully your organization has already had a relationship at this point, and if not, then that's something to work on. But I think that getting that guidance and just being like, you know, we're thinking about applying for this grant, and we're thinking about how your tribal, you know, organization can work with us in this. And I think that because a lot of times, I know for the organization that I work for, I help write grants and do that myself. One of the things that I didn't mention in my presentation is that all the field trips that kids come from Title I schools are all paid for by grants. They don't have to pay to even come to the field trip, so they just come, and it's just an opportunity for them to come and do these things. And I think that that's what's important, is when you're already applying for a grant and thinking about things, you're thinking about who could be good partners in the process. And so that's even before you even get funding for something, versus you got funding and now maybe I'll find a little bit of that funding for you to work on this. It's just, and we have a lot of knowledge that we can share, but also it's that continual building relationship, but also when you're at a point where you already have those contacts and you've established a well enough relationship, then really seek out that knowledge and just be able to be like, hey, even if you're bouncing ideas back and they tell you this is not something we have capacity for right now, but just even at that point, when you're already thinking about and having the wheels turning on a project that you're wanting to work on, then I think that's what I meant by guidance. Just if you're already in a starting process and you're thinking about it, then that should be a #1 part of the process.
Great. Thank you, Gabriel. And Mark, I want you to talk a little bit about the demanding need of housing and how you balance that with the work of the LA River. But so start thinking about that. But Rudy, if you could add a little bit to that. You talked about spaces for cultural practices. How do you balance having spaces for practicing cultural or ceremony when there's limited land or there is no land? And so some of these things have to happen in public places or co-management. So can you talk a little bit about that need or how you manage that?
Sure. Well, there's a little back history to that question as far as acquiring spaces for ceremonial practices. So in roughly 1998, 99 or so, I went up for ceremony. It was a fasting that I do, or one within our tribal communities. And one of the spaces that we selected for the ceremony was in the Angeles Forest. At the same time, there was a migration of tadpoles that were going through. Environmentalists came out and said, hey, you can't go in there. You can't drive vehicles. You can't do ceremony. And this had been a yearly process with all of the permitting, the process, because we're going to do fire. We were isolated up in the mountain. We closed it off for public. No one could get access to it. But there was a last-minute protest towards the tribe going up there. And it was actually my ceremony. It was me at age of probably 20, 21 or so, going up for ceremony. And I have organized a number of tribal communities that have traveled as far north as Tachi Reservation, and then down south as Barona Reservation. They came up for the ceremony. And so they hear that, the possibility of not doing that. So talking to the forest ranger and the fire department and others, they grant us access. And the one thing was we weren't taking vehicles up there. We were going to hike up to the ceremony part. But so once that was explained, the nerves were still kind of there for the environmental folks that were against us because we were doing ceremony in an area that they felt was a tadpole crossing, that there was mitigation of them surviving. But those are the things that we're not going to harm them, right? So how do we work with that? And along with that, it became other issues. In LA County, along in the Silmar area, we were harvesting Tule River on Tule to build a traditional quiche, a house. In our language, we call it quiche. And so we were building that out, same thing. We were harvesting it. We had a number of high school kids from North Hollywood High School. So from Fort Lauderdale, your education, when you take the youth out of their element of apartments and you take them into wildness or the forest, and they didn't even know there was a forest here. And to show them traditional teaching that's so basic, there's no really, other than it's work, right? You're harvesting. That's the traditions. That's our tradition. It's work. Even my two sons, they argue, you know, we got to work. They don't really complain, but they argue and they're muffling, you know, I can hear them. But this was, you know, we took these high school kids and they were there, and again, you know, sheriffs came over and said, hey, where's your permit? I'm the kind of person, folks that work around me knows I just go do it, and then if a problem comes, we'll resolve it then, because I've learned getting a permit. Now I'll file permits too, but sometimes the permit just takes too long. So, you know, one panel that I've been on before, I call it white tape, right? Instead of red tape, it's white tape. It's blocking me and tribal people to do cultural ceremonies. So serving on Santa Monica Mountains and in the commission and advising a good friend, Assemblymember James Ramos, when he was the chairman for Native American Heritage Commission, was the access of parks and spaces. And how do we do it? So this is 20 years ago. We've been talking about this. How do we get policy up there? And 20 years back was very hard to get it, but now it's more, folks are engaging more so. We have tribes, the Gabrielinos, Chumash, other folks, everyone now speaking about it. So they hear overwhelming about these policies, to the point my tribe's now created an MOU with state of parks, California State Parks. And others, and even talking to County of Los Angeles Parks and Recs about access, harvesting. Because when we take our children to go teach them traditional cooking of we wish, acorn mush. So even talking with the executive officer of Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, what is the access, the cultural easement? How do we do, what's cultural management, or what's co-management? It could be variable levels of stages. It doesn't have to mean that we own the property outright, but we have access. So when my father passed in 2009, we got an MOU with the city of San Fernando that should have been a reservation land in 1892, but it wasn't because of the climate. So we got 2.5 acres of co-management. I think it was the first in the state of California. But we didn't announce it because the MOU, we weren't too happy, but we'll use it. We grabbed the key. It says we're supposed to get the key every so often. I took the key, made a copy, and I have a copy of the key. You know, we maintain the park, and we use it for tribal meetings. And the odd part is that the city parks manager came out and says, you had a wedding there. That's not cultural. I said, what are you talking about? And then people get married. So they were very upset, you know. So people get this illusion that we're back in 1700. I think they're watching Yellowstone too much, you know. So, but we're not. We're regular people, and we mix our cultures with either Christianity, Catholicism. So there's a hybrid of our cultures. When I see a lot of traditions in Mexico, it's very indigenous. When they raise the flag for the banner of flags from Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos. That's our culture as well. It's Kifai. So we raise those flags. So that's what I'm talking about, is this policy, working with tribes, working with individuals to give access so that we can practice ceremonies. And many people in Los Angeles who are tribal back to our Signage project, what I didn't say earlier, is no one who's native don't feel they're native in Los Angeles. There's not enough indigenous information or culture that says this is native land. And where do you go practice? Being who you grew up as.
Rudy,
right?
We're going to... Thank you.
I'll take it away. You're going to stop me.
Yeah, I saw you getting ready for the next 10 minutes. But, and Gabriel, just like I did, I want Mark to answer the question. But Gabriel, you know, if you could start thinking about, you talked about the Western science and connecting that to culture. And so, you know, what is the data and cultural and community connection? How are you doing that, and how should we be learning about connecting both of those? And then, Mark, what's your? You want him to go first? Let him go first. You start thinking about it. No, think about it. Yeah. Okay. Mark, you're on next. Housing. Yep. And you know, when a master plan comes out for the LA River or any master plan related to environmental issues, all these other issues almost attach themselves to that. However, housing is it. This is where we've been talking about this, and Barbara talked about this, you know, 20 years, and we're recycling more water, but we're also recycling the same conversations. And at some point, we got to say, let's put it in the ground. So any thoughts on that, on balancing the housing needs with what's happening in equitable community development?
Let me just say that the RMC, Rivers and Mountains Conservancy, is an open space organization.
I get it.
and it's interested in habitat protection, expanding open space, protecting our natural resources here in Los Angeles County and the upper portion of Orange County. But we were the organization that moved forward the revitalization plan for the lower half of the LA River. As Miguel was saying, as we went through that process, we realized that we couldn't just focus on our mission. We had to address other things that are going on in the community. Housing is one of the big ones. Encampments along the river corridor is a big one. Mobility, access to the river is a big issue. You have this river corridor that people have a hard time accessing because we turned our backs on the river. So if you actually were to travel down the bike path, you find that, you know, getting into some of the cities and out of some of the cities is very difficult. So we had to recognize those things as we talked to the community because they continuously brought them up. So part of the revitalization plan is actually what we call the toolkit, because it looks at all those different aspects. We address those things as we look at, you know, more green space, more natural resources, habitat protection. We looked at all those things and it became incorporated into the revitalization plan. We have specific toolkits that address all of those different concerns. Housing, if you're familiar with Southeast Los Angeles, it is the most densest portions of our metropolitan area. And these communities are very small and they're extremely dense, and also they happen to be the most poor areas within our metropolitan area as well. And that extends all the way down to Long Beach. It's funny because you look at the western side of Long Beach versus the eastern side of Long Beach that's along the San Gabriel River. And you'll notice all this green space along the San Gabriel River, but hardly any along the Los Angeles River, even in Long Beach, which isn't considered as dense as Southeast Los Angeles, and as park poor, even though it's park poor as well. So we're dealing with a situation where we have extreme housing needs and we have open space needs together. So obviously it creates an opportunity for us to partner to address both of the concerns. I think that's going to be one of the biggest opportunities for us moving forward, to address housing and open space jointly, particularly for an organization like mine where we're trying to expand open space, but we also recognize that there's housing needs that's going to take up some of that space. So how do we address both of those concerns together? And some of the opportunities that we have, particularly in the Southeast where it's so dense, is how do we green what's already there? You know, how do we green the streets? How do we green, you know, people's communities? How do we do that, you know, and create connections to the river? It's not all about just the river corridor, but what's off the river corridor too is part of our concern. That's why, you know, there was no master plan for the lower half of the Los Angeles River. We got engaged in that process, working with the communities in terms of developing master plans so they can compete better for funding opportunities. And, you know, going off the river corridor and addressing, you know, natural resources needs, it's still a habitat there. even though we have a built environment. It's still a concern about natural resources, even though we have a built environment. Those are still our concerns, not just the river corridor itself, but how do we take and create opportunities for people who are off the river to connect to it.
Thank you. And Gabriel, I want you, how much time do we have for our panel? 5 minutes? Or we're closing? Well, how much time? Okay. Gabrielle, why don't you answer your question, then Barbara has the last question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so
thank you.
I feel like I'm kind of in a unique position. The fact that, like I said before, that I went and I have a bachelor's of science, and I've worked with that degree since I graduated from Cal Poly, and I feel it has given me a leg up, but also at the same time, it frustrates me to feel like because I went to school and studied something and I've worked in a career and taught about it and done it for a very long period of time, that for some reason that gets listened to and more respected by people with a Western scientific education than those that the teachings that we've been taught for thousands of years and generation to generation, that we had doctors and experts in fields, and yet it's not we're trying to get it to a point where traditional ecological knowledge is accepted as a form just as much as a Western education would be, but there's also barriers to that. So an example of that is, I mentioned before that I do a lot of work with the MPA collaboratives obviously in my ancestral territories. I also happen to live down in Encinitas, so down in San Diego area, so I'm also part of that one. Because I think that it's important to note that when they decided to put these policies in practice for these marine protected areas over 10 years ago, they didn't have any tribal component whatsoever. So they completely left out tribal communities and the fact that these are our coastlines that we've been taking care of for thousands of years, and then all of a sudden we have policy and procedures that are defining what we can and can't do in these areas, and going to meetings and having to fight to talk to them about why is it that we can't, sustain ourselves and be able to go out and gather things at certain times during the year, or, so it's getting to this, and what I meant by trying to have that Western science and traditional knowledge, it should be knowledge is knowledge. It shouldn't just be because you went to school and you're an expert in this that you can come and tell myself or my family or people that have known these and taking care of these areas for thousands of years that you're not an expert on it, but yet we're going to get guidance from you on certain things, but then we'll be done with it. So it's just, it's talking about, it's having a level of respect and realizing that we bring as much to the table as anyone that has a Western education, but also at the same time that we all have opportunities to learn something from each other. A lot of times, Rudy and myself, we are part of the tribal partners that work to actually have P22 buried. That in itself was an amazing event to be able to get all of our tribal communities and some of us that haven't been able to work together for a long period of time to be able to accomplish something, but also at the same time to be able to go to meetings and talk to people from the Department of Fish and Wildlife and say, oh, well, we've never had a request like this from you before. And it's like, well, you've also never let us sit at the table in conversations like this. And so it's getting to the point where, I feel like I have a slight advantage, having a scientific background and knowing what they're talking about and knowing what they're testing and different things like that. But at the same time, we shouldn't be talked to like we don't know anything. Like we're experts in our own field, and yet, we just want everybody to realize that, like, I've had conversations too where people have come up to me and they're like, oh, well, I realized that I heard that you don't like what our organization is doing. Not even introducing themselves, and that's the first thing they say to it. And I don't know if it's because I'm a woman first or what it is, but I just feel like, how is it that that's a way to introduce yourself to anyone, right? And so I know I wouldn't introduce myself like that to anyone, but it's just getting to that point where there is a mutual respect, and also realizing that that's part of that reciprocity, that it's like you're going to be able to learn a lot from us, but also we may not have the ability to go and test things in a lab, and we appreciate that you have careers that you're doing that, and we want to be part of this research process. It's not just, when we're talking about community-based research, it's also, you know, having a tribal component and being able to go out and do research and go out on the land, and sometimes in getting involved with other environmental organizations so we gain access to places that sometimes we might not even be able to gain access to. So it's just a level of understanding, a level of respect.
Thank you, Gabriel. So as we close, I'll just make a last statement that, you know, as much as we believe that we're changing the river with our actions and our work and our studies, perhaps the river is also changing us. The river has been here before us. The river will continue to rebloom again and again and again, long before, long after we are gone. But I'm also certain that the tools and the connections and the relationships that we establish in the present with the river today can serve as the guideposts for future generations. So with that, let me please ask for a round of applause for our panelists and what they shared.